Okay. So this is most of what we're going to learn is based on a shiur that I heard from this chap called Rav Rami Brachiyahu. Rav Rami Brachiyahu was, and I think he still is, the chief rabbi of the police. Just hear that, the chief rabbi of the police. Isn't that an amazing concept? Yeah, meaning like the halachic questions that that happen in the police force. He's the person that decides. He's also recruits religious people into the police, making it a much more accepting place for religious policemen. But the question, I suppose the event, I don't know if the event, an event that triggered this discussion about integrating religious people into the police was an article that appeared about 20 years ago in Yediot Achronot. Have you heard of Yediot Achronot? It's probably the most widely read Hebrew daily newspaper. And in the Yediot Achronot, and I actually put the quote from it in source number 1. So we have a newspaper with which we're starting. So the headline is, policemen are required to work on Shabbat. That's a ruling of the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said that if you're a policeman, you have to work on Shabbat.
But God, it's like the High Court, right?
Yeah, the High Court. Yeah. But yeah, exactly. Okay, Mefakeach Mishneh Yecheskel Al-Masi. So there was a senior police officer, his name was Yecheskel Al-Masi, went to Bagatz, to the Supreme Court, because the police had told him that he has to work on Shabbat. And he said, Lidvarav, that the Mishnah says that we work 365 days a year. And if you can't accept that working for us involves working on Shabbat, then you have to make the right decisions and you have to go to somebody else and work somewhere else. When he says work for the police, it means unlike other offices. If you work in a shop, if you're a bus driver, so the buses don't run on Shabbat. The police runs every single day, works every single day. So even if my position in the police force is not necessarily a job that is saving a life, but the police isn't something you can choose, I'm going to work, I'm not going to work. If you're working for the police, you have to work 365 days a year. And if a religious Jew asked and said, I would prefer all of my shifts to be on a weekday and to have no shifts on Shabbat, and he went to the Bagatz, the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court rejected his request and said, no, if you work for the police, you have to work for the police every day of the week, even on Shabbat. And this, I suppose, was made religious people reluctant to work for the police, because I prefer to have the opportunity of, some people observe and some people don't. Let the people that do observe Shabbat, let them not have to work on Shabbat. You follow?
Yeah. Exactly.
But the truth is, this question is a much, much bigger question about services on Shabbat. You couldn't have a police force that in a country that operates fully 6 days a week and then Shabbat. So, tell any criminal and they'll be all right. They'd be quite happy about that. In a different context, it's not just the police force. My brother lives in a neighborhood called Givat Mordechai. Do you know where that is? Near Beit Vegan, South Jerusalem. Anyway, there's a big fire station in Givat Mordechai, and they have a shul inside the fire station. And every Friday night, if I'm a firefighter, you have to be on call. And if you're a firefighter and you have to be on call, you can't always be sure that your shifts won't be on Shabbat. So they have a shul inside the fire station, and all the firefighters who are on call, and then many people from the local community, which is religious, have this beautiful davening on Friday nights at the fire station. I suppose if you ever find yourselves in Givat Mordechai, find out where the fire station is, and maybe you can daven in the fire station on Friday night, which is amazing. But it's part of a much bigger question, and that's a question that we're going to talk about today. Obviously, we're talking about when you're allowed to break Shabbat or when you're not allowed to break Shabbat. But the definition of what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do, has to be different for a country as opposed to an individual. So, for example, if I, as an individual in my home, chas v'shalom, need to make a phone call on Shabbat or need to drive in order to save a life. So you'd be allowed to break Shabbat in order to save a particular person. But a country can't run, the state of Israel, our Jewish state, can't run in a way that it operates fully 6 days a week, and then one day of the week there's like a skeleton service, where all religious people sort of, take a step back. So we have to try to understand how to define the concept of Pikuach Nefesh, not just as individuals, but see on a national level if there's a new way to look at it. Now, I'll just tell you why this is such an exciting question. Because this is a question that we haven't thought about for 2,000 years. There's never been a Jewish police force or a Jewish fire station or a Jewish army or any sort of national situation where you have to think about these questions. A Jewish electrical grid, national grid, to provide electricity. So all these tashtiyot is like essential services that every country has involve transgressing Shabbat. But we've never been in charge of it. We've lived in countries, but we, as religious Jews, have never been in charge of it. And therefore, we have to see how we today grapple with these complicated questions. You follow? Yeah. So our discussion is going to be divided into 3 parts. I think the first part is the classic definition of Pikuach Nefesh. The classic definition, which is the definition that has helped us through 2,000 years of exile since the time of the Mishnah. I mean that the definition is much more recent, but I think that it's it's based on halachic sources that have really helped us for all the years of exile. That's point number 1. Then point number 2 is talk about how the situation might be different in a sovereign Jewish state. Point number 2. And then point number 3 is what halachic, because it can't just be, I feel this is what we need to do. Yeah. Like what halachic justification could there be to expand the definition of Pikuach Nefesh in a Jewish state? You follow? Oh. Okay, that's the third part. Okay, so let's start with part number 1. Part number 1 is really defining the age-old question that we've been thinking about for over 2,000 years. What is Pikuach Nefesh? We learned it today. Right. If anyone wants to know, look at the Rambam. The Rambam in Hilchot Shabbat opens with the discussion on Pikuach Nefesh on Shabbat. Okay, so first of all, what's the rationale? Why is the idea of Pikuach Nefesh? Pikuach Nefesh, we often talk about Pikuach Nefesh on Shabbat, but Pikuach Nefesh applies to any mitzvah. Pikuach Nefesh is transgressing the Torah in order to preserve life. But the most common example is Shabbat, but it's not the only one. Okay, so this is source number 2, the Gemara in Yuma. It appears in more than one place, but I think this is it's disputed, and this seems to be the conclusion. So Gemara in Yuma talks about this. This is Rav Shimon ben Manasseh. So Rav Shimon ben Manasseh said, "V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et Shabbat." Are you familiar with that pasuk? Yeah. Coming up for it in Sefer Shemot. V'shamru, the Jewish people kept Shabbat. Amra Torah, the Torah says, "Chalel alav Shabbat achat kedei shishmor Shabbatot harbeh." Allow somebody to transgress one Shabbat in order they should be able to live many more Shabbatot afterwards. I might just add in brackets that when we were learning today and somebody asked David that was David was quoting the Gemara in Yuma. Yeah. Isn't that amazing?
I didn't know it was from the Gemara, but I remember that sentence.
Oh, there you are. That's it. Okay, so that's it. Okay, so that's the rationale. in Gemara. Now, there's more than one rationale. Others say, "V'chai b'hem," the Torah was given for us to live by. We live by the Torah, not to die by the Torah. So there are other sources, but we haven't. But this is really the introduction to our discussion today, rather than the whole discussion. But if you have a look at the Shulchan Aruch, the siman that talks about Pikuach Nefesh on Shabbat in Shulchan Aruch is Shin Kafchet. Siman Shin Kafchet. Okay, Misha Yesh Lo Choli Shel Sakana. If somebody who is in danger. Now look at this word here. This is such an important word. Mitzvah lechalel alav et Shabbat. Do you know what that means?
You have to.
Yeah, we are required to transgress Shabbat for them. Hazari, someone who is quick. Harizeh mishubach, should be praised. Fashuel, and somebody who, delays, or somebody is sort of wondering what to do. Harizeh shofech damim, chas v'shalom. It's like causing, somebody to compromise their health. Now, the Shulchan Aruch's wording is very important. Mitzvah. It's not that you're allowed to break Shabbat. The same God that tells me to keep Shabbat, in that moment tells me to break Shabbat. You follow? I'm not compromising. I'm doing God's will. God's will is to drive them. God's will is to take care of them. God's will is to treat them. You hear that? The wording is very important. Mitzvah l'chalalavat Shabbat. Now that idea is very powerful, very, very important. But, buts are right, but it's like fire, Pikuach Nefesh, because you could take it too far. If I'm worried, you could end up doing anything. Now, I don't know what I would do in this situation, but I was at a Shabbat meal. It was a long time ago, a few years ago even, and we were talking at the Shabbat meal about Pikuach Nefesh. And somebody at the meal said that it was a Shabbat morning, the previous night, the Friday night, they were having a big, big Shabbat meal. All the family was together, they'd cooked food, and it was like waited months and months for this big, big family reunion, and the whole world was excited, and it was the middle of the winter, every heater in the house was on, like it was Anyway, just before Kiddush, do you know what happened? There was a power overload, and then it went pitch dark, all the hot plates turned off, and we were planning for the Shabbat, and then, can you imagine how disappointed they were? And then somebody said, well, it's Pikuach Nefesh to turn the lights on because they're young children here. And if it's in the dark, they might run into something. You follow? And then they flick the lights on again. Now, I'm not sure. I wasn't there, so I don't know exactly the situation. But sometimes I worry that you can take Pikuach Nefesh too far. You know what I mean? And you can end up allowing yourselves to do many things that are really not permitted on Shabbat and justify them because it's Pikuach Nefesh. So you need quite a solid definition of Pikuach Nefesh. On the one hand, it's one of the things like you know it when you see it. You know what I mean? Like the concept of Pikuach Nefesh. I know when I need to make a phone call, and you don't want people, God forbid, to be in a situation they might hesitate, because hesitating could cost lives. So you have to be quick. You have to be really quick on these sorts of things. Anyway, but you need a very firm definition of it. I'll just tell you one more quick story before we get onto a beautiful definition from the Nodab Yehuda. Before we get there, a few weeks ago, it was a Friday night. So our neighbor in where we live is one of the 36 hidden tzaddikim. Maybe I shouldn't say too loud because I don't want everybody to know. But he is one of the 36 hidden tzaddikim of our generation. And there are so many things he does that I don't know about, that no one knows about. But one of the things that I do know about him is that he's a volunteer for Hatzalah. So he's a religious Jew, but he walks around with a phone on Friday nights. One week, after the meal, it was, everything was cleared away, and I thought I would sit at the Shabbat table and study a bit more before I go to bed. And then I went to bed feeling very, very holy. It was very good. Like it was Friday night. And you pushed, everyone goes to sleep and then you stay up for a little bit more, you feel, well, that was really good of me. And then as I was closing the books there and getting ready, I looked out of the window and I saw him on his motorbike driving back home again after going out on a call. I feel I was like nothing compared to this guy. Isn't that amazing? Such a holy person. But that's Pikuach, that's mamash the real deal. You know what I mean? That's Pikuach Nefesh. But when would you be allowed to get into, like, when is he allowed to go? When you're not allowed to go? So there's a beautiful, beautiful explanation. It was written by the Nodab Yehuda, Rabbi Cheskel Landau, was the chief rabbi of Prague. We don't have any Europeans here at the moment. Do you remember they used to? Oh no, you're sort of a European.
Yeah.
In fact, you are wrong. That's true.
It's pretty European, I would say.
No, I meant like East European.
Oh.
Do you remember we had all those Polish boys, and they would they could like tell us all about. They all like Prague and Czechoslovakia and Hungary. They all know about these things. Anyways, he was the chief rabbi. There was a huge Jewish community in the 18th century, and he was the chief rabbi of Prague, which was probably one of the largest Jewish communities at the time. He was asked a question from London. The question was about a woman who had gallstones, and they operated on her, removed the gallstones. But oh wow, Shalom Aleichem. What a joy to see you. The operation didn't work, and they wanted to do an autopsy to see what went wrong. And they asked him, are you allowed to do an autopsy? Does everyone remember the answer?
Yeah, the answer was no.
The answer was, you're allowed to do an autopsy only if...
right now another person has the same condition issue with the gallstones.
Oh, exactly.
Save his life if you do the autopsy.
Exactly. You're only allowed to do Pikuach Nefesh if there is a Nefesh. I'm only allowed to do it if I'm saving a particular person's life. You follow? And that's why, the story I mentioned earlier about the when there was a power cut. If everyone just sits around the table, everyone will be fine. By turning on the light, I'm not saving anyone's life. You follow? I'm only allowed to do so. If I break Shabbat, my action has to be an action that will save a life. You follow? But since it's not saving a life, therefore you wouldn't be allowed to do it. So he forbade an autopsy unless I could point to a person whose life will be saved as a result of the autopsy. And that became, as I'm sure you can imagine, because it's so clear and it makes so much sense, that became the definition of Pikuach Nefesh. In order to break Shabbat, you have to be saving a life.
Right.
You hear that? Now, the trouble is, if I take that to the state of Israel, and I tell that to the police department, the fire department, the electricity company, and I'm saying you're only allowed to work if they call you. So then it's a bit tricky because I don't know if I'm allowed to go out. So, for example, if there's a call to the police, so they say, I think it's going bad. Well, how bad is it? You have to know, can I go out or can I not go out? Is it Pikuach Nefesh? Am I saving a life? Indeed, the very first chief rabbi of Israel, his name was Rav Yitzchak Herzog.
Grandfather of the...
Yes, in fact, the president is called Yitzchak Herzog after his grandfather, who was Rav Yitzchak Herzog. And he was the first chief rabbi in Israel at the establishment of the state of Israel. So many of these questions, he was the person that had to deal with them because, he was the person at the time. And he wrote a very, very interesting ruling. He wrote like this, in source number 5. Ha-heter. So we're talking about if you get called, a policeman gets called on Shabbat, he says you have to walk. Ideally, if you get called, you should walk to the place where you're going. Let's say you are called, God forbid, to something that could save a life. Afterwards, you wouldn't be allowed to drive back in a police car, because to drive back from the place where something happened back to the police station is not Pikuach Nefesh. You need to leave the car there until after Shabbos. And he said to go on a patrols, you wouldn't be allowed to go on a patrol car on Shabbat because a patrol car isn't saving a life. You follow? Furthermore, he says if you know that driving around, sometimes when I go on they used to do this more in the olden days. Policemen used to have a beat. Do they still do that nowadays?
Baton.
Huh?
Baton.
No, go on a beat. I mean, like they have a route. So let's say when I was a little boy, now I'm a policeman. So then twice a day I would walk up and down this street. Not because anything's happening, just like to walk up and down, just because the police presence means something.
Yeah,
I know.
they used to do it.
So I know I work in town. There are often these policemen on horses. They just go up and down Rehov Yafo. Not because they've been called, just because police presence in a place makes people a bit more, cautious. Not going to play around. So he's saying, we're not driving up and down to save lives, but if we're not there, something could happen. So we want to go up and down. So he said they're allowed to, but they're allowed only on a bike, but not in a car, because following really the Noda B'Yehuda, you're only allowed to break Shabbat if there's a Nefesh. You hear that? Okay. That is the end of part 1, which is the definition of Pikuach Nefesh that served the Jewish people very, very well for 2,000 years when we were small communities in the diaspora. But what we said until now is very, very difficult in a sovereign state. To have a police force that operates 1 day a week only on bicycles would make, I'm not a criminal, but if I were, I know which day I would, it would be easy to decide how to do stuff. Huh?
Vulnerability.
Yeah, it's a problem. So
that also only applies to the Jewish cops. Obviously, you'd also have non-Jewish cops as well.
Oh, you're right. We could, if we had, but you can't. That's true.
So as long as the force isn't predominantly Jewish, there isn't as much of a chashash that.
Oh, so that goes back to our first point, the very first with which we opened, that we want all religious Jews to be able to integrate in all areas of Israeli society. So if we're saying that to be a senior police officer, you can't be Shabbat observant, is a problem. It's a bit like lahavdil nowadays in Israel. To be a professional footballer is a problem, because unfortunately, I hate to say terrible things. Yeah, they play football in Israel on Shabbatot, which makes it difficult. Well, that's a discussion for another day. Anyway, but the definition that we've seen until now is tricky.
Itself isn't necessarily the issue. It's more of the getting there.
What? Getting where?
Getting to the stadium.
Ah, yeah, that's true.
They could sleep in the stadium, but it's not exactly.
Yeah, it's not really the way to do things. Yeah. Exactly. But that's not our topic for now. Now, there is a very, very important rabbi, and I mentioned that the sources that we're looking at are primarily based on a shir that I went to by Rav Rami Brachyahu, but he was basing himself on the teachings of a rabbi called Rav Shaul Yisraeli. Anyone here heard of Rav Shaul Yisraeli? So Rav Shaul Yisraeli was the Rav, I think the first Rav of Kfar HaRo'eh. He was a student of Rav Kook, together with Rav Neria, Rav Moshe Tzvi Neria, and Rav Shaul Yisraeli were Talmidim of Rav Kook. And what Rav Shaul Yisraeli, his sort of niche, was Halacha. At the beginning we were talking about national Halacha, Halacha that people may not have contemplated for the last 2,000 years. That became his area of expertise, and he sort of took his halachic knowledge and he really, really focused on trying to find halachic solutions in the modern state of Israel. He set up a kollel called Eretz Chemda, which is a very, very successful kollel in Katamon, and they train Dayanim and they train Rabbanim and they train them for Israel and for Chutz La'aretz, and they study his works and they continue the work that he began, very much in finding modern halachic solutions in this miracle of Israeli Jewish sovereignty in the land of Israel. So, based on what we've said so far, we're quite limited on what a policeman is allowed to do on Shabbat, right? But there has to be, there has to be a wider way of looking at things, and Rav Shaul Yisraeli brings us to a very, very interesting piece of Gemara. We're going to look at the Gemara, and then we're going to look at two interpretations of the Gemara, and we will see that the second interpretation of the Gemara opens up the possibility of a wider definition of Pikuach Nefesh. Okay, so this is what the Gemara says. Amar Shmuel, we're in source number 6. Mechabin, you are allowed to extinguish Gachelet shel matechet bireshut harabim b'shvil shelo yizoku barabim. If there is, do you call it molten metal? How do you say boil? Red hot metal. Red hot metal.
Molten?
Is that the word? No, we're going to go. We'll stick. Well, whenever Moshe says something, I'll go with Moshe. Huh?
Glowing metal.
Oh well, we'll get to that. I think it may not be glowing.
Glowing.
No, but sometimes metal. I don't know if you've ever. Most children discover this at some point in their lives. It's not visibly boiling. You know, like you touch it. That's how you. Like, don't touch it. It's hot. Don't touch it. It's hot. Then you go, oh, yep. Turns out it's hot. Anyway, so it's that sort. It's boiling hot metal, right?
Yeah.
And it's in a public area. You are allowed to pour cold water onto this boiling metal on Shabbat in order to cool it down and prevent people from burning themselves. Aval lo gachelet shel etz. However, if there's a fire, you're not allowed to. You're not allowed to pour. So if there's a fire in Reshut Harabim, you're not allowed to pour water on the fire. But if there's boiling metal, you are allowed to pour water on the boiling metal. What's the difference between metal and wood?
Well, if wood burns, you see that it burns, and metal, it's hot, but it doesn't necessarily see that it's hot. Unless it's very hot.
I'm just so torn about what to do now, because you are excellent, but that's not the next source on the sheet. Shall I break the rules and jump? What? Say that again?
The wood is already on fire. The metal isn't on fire, but it could cause a fire.
No, but we're not. I think we're less worried about the fire spreading. We're worried about people walking in the public thoroughfare and getting burnt. That's what we're worried about.
The fire is noticeable.
Yeah,
that's your point.
Yeah, excellent. So therefore, okay, good. We'll come to that in a minute. That is excellent. Rashi gives a different reason. Rashi says, as you probably all know, are you allowed to extinguish a fire on Shabbat? No, it's a melacha, nachon, mechabeh. Isur d'oraita, exactly. So he says like this: cooling down hot metal is asur on Shabbat. But the isur is an isur d'Rabbanan. It's a rabbinic prohibition. But putting out a fire is asur d'oraita. So therefore, according to Rashi, they're both dangerous. And I wish I could put them both away. But they're not causing anyone any, there's no one right this minute in pain. So therefore, the danger is sufficient to allow me to waive an isur d'Rabbanan. So if I can put out the metal, but it is not, the sort of prevention of danger is not big enough to push away d'oraita. That's Rashi. Is that clear? Okay. But now, if we go to source number 8, we come to the words of David for Yosef. Because he says something, he quotes Rashi, but then he says something else. Okay, if you go to the third line down in source number 8, towards the beginning of the line, we've got Aval, Baal Halachot Gedolot. Can you see that? The Baal Halachot Gedolot, which was an important Sefer Halacha from the 12th, 13th century, very early on. The Baal Halachot Gedolot says, Hard to mifliki, the fact that the Gemara makes a distinction between metal and wood is because Kama de lo kabia it be sumka. For chazula, burning wood is something that people can see. Velo ati leit zuke ba. And because people can see it, they're gonna know to avoid it. If I see a burning piece of wood on this side, I will walk on this side on Shabbat because I know it's dangerous. However, matechet afal gav the azil sumka lo kavi avati litzuke. Never, but boiling metal, people can't see that it's boiling hot, and therefore people can cause themselves danger. You hear that? Now, what's interesting? Now, this is really, really very, very big deal. Mashma desfiule, according to Baal Halachot Gedolot, this is the Ran quoting the Baal Halachot Gedolot, Debit Travaihu Ika Isura Doraita. He is not going like Rashi. Rashi's distinction is easy. Wood is Doraita, metal is Rabbanan. Easy. He says, huh?
He says,
metal is also exactly. He doesn't say that. He says, I can see the wood and I can't see the metal. But mashma, that the level of Isur is the same. You follow? Meaning, if he's not going, the easier option is to allow it because it's Durabonon. But that's not what he's saying. Mashma, it would seem that according to the Baal Halachot Gedolot, and this is a big point, you are allowed to break an Isur D'Oraita, to put out the metal, because people can't see it. You follow? Now let's keep reading in this, because this is really, really very, very good. 1 second. Shenira. Now if you have a look at the bottom, I've underlined it. It appears. This is the Ran explaining the Bahag. Do you follow what I mean? The Ran, who is a commentary on the back of the Gemara, as you know, the Ran, Rabbeinu Nissim, explains the position of Baal Halachot Gedolot. And he says, why is it that he says that the difference is, I can see wood, but I can't see metal? Why? Because he believes, Nira appears to, I think that the reason why the Ran think the reason why the Baal Halachot Gedolot said what he says is because he believes the Nizkata Rabbim. Do you know what Nizkata Rabbim means? Nizkata Rabbim means public danger. Kasakanat nefashot chashivlan. I'm sorry. He considers the possibility of public danger equivalent to Pikuach Nefesh. So now we have a new category that allows us to transgress an Isur D'Oraita on Shabbat. Pikuach Nefesh is like the Noda B'Yehuda, in a situation where a person's life is in danger, but not only if a person's life is in danger, but if the community there's a possibility that the community might be in danger, I'd be allowed to transgress an Isur D'Oraita, like putting up the metal beam, which is Asur D'Oraita according to the Bahag. I'd be allowed to do that because the possibility of causing danger to people is sufficient. Does that make sense to you? Okay, on that, Rav Shaul Yisraeli adds more. He says, Kol ma shenogea l'shalom hatzibur. Everything that is related to shalom hatzibur, that means, now he's gone further, it's not just avoiding danger, but shalom hatzibur means to maintain order, public order. You follow? Kol ma shenogea l'shalom hatzibur or siluk nezek, or removing danger, hakol nechshav kepikuach nefesh. Now he's gone further. He's saying that I'm allowed to break Shabbat, not just to save a life, and not just to remove danger, but even to maintain public order. You hear that? Because in a country where there's no public order, then someone's going to get hurt. You follow? That's just how it is. Maybe not the first week, but eventually, if everyone knows that it's like a absolute like a pandemonium every Shabbat. So eventually it's just going to be crazy. You follow that? So maintaining public order, do you see we've got 3 stages, Pikuach Nefesh, public danger, and then maintaining, what do we call it? Shalom HaTzibur. Okay. Everything that's related to maintaining public order, it's really the same thing. Pikuach Nefesh and public order boil down to the same thing. Do you follow? And it gives an example. Parnasat hayachid לדוגמה אין בו משום פיקוח נפש, אבל אם הציבור יהא מחוסר פרנסה, אפילו אין זה נוגע ללחם, ולא ימנות באחד מבין הרבים, יהא כזה שהוא צריך לאכול יותר משובח, שאצלנו זה יכול להיות פיקוח נפש. Let's move on to, okay, I won't explain that last sentence, because we're going to look at it in more detail in a minute. Okay. Okay, is this clear to everybody so far? Okay, so now Rav Yisraeli, and we're going to see how he does it, wants to extend this heter from Pikuach Nefesh to Nezek HaTzibur to Shlom HaTzibur. And he's going to do that we're going to read another little piece of Gemara. Look at this piece of Gemara. It's not the Gemara, sorry, it's a Rambam. Oh! It's even for you. You're going to get there soon.
Right.
Like in a week or two, you'll be reading this. Goyim, non-Jews, that were attacking a Jewish town, im ba'u al iskei mamon, ein mechalim aleim et haShabbat, ve'ein osim imahim melacha, uve'ira smucha lesfar, afilu lo ba'u al iskei teven v'kash, yotzim alehem bechli zaven u'mechalim aleim et haShabbat. ובכל מקום, אם באו על עסקי נפשות, או שערכו מלחמו, או שערו סם, יוצאים עליהם בכלי זין ומחללים עליהם את השבת. Okay, so he's talking, if Jews get attacked, chas v'sholom, on Shabbat, in what way you're allowed to retaliate. Now look at this over here. Mitzvah, it is a requirement, and every Jew that can go and help in the war effort, to save them on Shabbat, and they're not allowed to hesitate until Motzei Shabbat. And now look at this. And let's say you break in and you save the Jews. Mutar lahem lachzor bechli zayin shelahem limukomam b'Shabbat kedei shelo lahachshilam la'atid lavo. Now this talks about driving the car back home afterwards. Let's say we take in all of our expensive equipment to get the Jews out. You know what's painful? It's really so hard to even talk about it, because the Rambam was writing 800 years ago, and it's just...
It's the situation right now.
Yeah, it's so hard to even say the words. Like, we've learned this Rambam. Jews have been learning this Rambam for years and years and years, and it's just very hard. Anyway, we should have peace. We should, this should end. So the Rambam is saying, let's say you bring in very expensive equipment, right? And then you do the job, and everyone's out. You're allowed to bring out the expensive equipment afterwards. Why? Because you don't want people wondering, shall I bring it, shall I not bring it? You follow? Meaning, like, when you're going on a national level, I think that's part of the idea. You're not just thinking about an isolated incident. You follow? There's like a modus operandi. This is the way we're always going to do it. So we're always going to come in, and then we'll always bring everything up. Because, like as an individual, you can say, well, I'm going to go, Be'ezrat Hashem, when you have the opportunity to take your wife to the hospital to give birth, Be'ezrat Hashem. When you get to the hospital, can you lock the car? Can you turn off the light? All those sorts of questions. Okay, but that doesn't happen every Shabbat. That happens, once or twice. It's not everyone gives birth on a Friday night. Do you know what I mean? Like in Be'ezrat Hashem, it's not something that happens the whole time. So that's like one set of rules. But then, if you're part of a country, so then you're not just thinking about now, but you're thinking about, if I tell the guy you can take your car, but you can't turn off the lights, that's the last time he's going to drive the car there. You follow? So, but if you're doing it every week, that's how the country works. And you can drive, turn off the lights, drive this way, drive that way. Not just the mission to, but the mission back as well as. You understand? Because otherwise, the country can't operate. I'm not looking anymore at Pikuach Nefesh as an isolated incident, but I'm looking at as a way of operating in a society. And for it to operate in a society, you have to equate Shlom HaTzibur, which is Shlom HaTzibur is like public safety or public, like public order. Public order in a country is the equivalent of Pikuach Nefesh for an individual. You follow? So everything that I as an individual would do for Pikuach Nefesh, as a country, we have to do all those things just to maintain public order. Because no public order is the equivalent of being in danger. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay, 1 second. I just want to go to... I think I'm going to skip to the bottom. 1 second. I'm going to skip to there. If you go to source number 13, there is a rabbi, Rav Yaakov Ariel. He was, until very recently, the chief rabbi of Ramat Gan. I think maybe a year or two, maybe a little bit longer. He stepped out. But he's certainly one of the most important halachic authorities alive today. He wrote a book. Can you see the book? Or I'm not sure it was a book. Or maybe he was part of a journal called Ma'aminim B'Mishtara, which was published 10 years ago, and it was to encourage religious people to enter into the police force, and discussing halachic questions and stuff like that. So based on everything we said, he lived. Rav Yaakov Ariel is alive today. But he sort of continues that the derech of Rav Shaul Yisraeli. In contrast, by the by, with Rav Herzog, who Rav Herzog was sort of maintained the definitions that we used before the state and then applied those definitions to the state of Israel, as opposed to Rav Shaul Yisraeli that created new definitions. So Rav Yaakov Ariel continues along the lines of Rav Shaul Yisraeli, and listen to what he says. The final source, Yetziat HaNayedet. Do you know what Nayedet is? A police car. So when a police car goes every Shabbat, Vadai Timna Pratzot Be'ezizman Shetizdamen. It's certain, we all know, when there are police cars driving around prevent crime. There's just no two ways about it. Even I've never done anything wrong. When you walk past a policeman, am I standing straight? What could I possibly have done? I'm an upstanding citizen. But we all, like a police car drives by, well, am I okay? It's a bit like, I don't want to get onto this, but when you're on the train, everybody knows that you did your rough cut. Everybody knows, right? But the inspector comes, did I do it? Did I not do it? Am I going to be okay? What's my fine going to be? We all know you've never ever not done it every time you've done it. You know what I mean by that? Okay, so anyway, point is, psychologically, same thing. When these police cars are driving up and down the roads, I can't say exactly what he's stopping, but we know enough about how society is run and the impact of the police and the role of the police. We all know that police cars driving around prevent crime. You follow? I can't say who it was and what he might have done, but it prevents crime. You follow? ולכן, יש לנו לראות את יציאת הניידת. We need to see these patrols on Shabbat כמכשיר פיקוח נפש של אותו שבת שבה השמירה תביא תועלת. You have to see that as an act of pikuach nefesh. It is maintaining public order. That is shlom hatzibur. The police operating on Shabbat is shlom tzibur. I don't need to wait to get called out. Just driving on my parole is Shlom HaTzibur. You hear that? Okay, Al Kain. Muteret af mechuyevet. Not only is it permitted, it is required to operate every Shabbat. Ki einat hayodeh ezo shetavi lidei pikuach nefesh v'al kein kulan bichlal haheder v'achiyuv. I never know. The only thing about criminals is they don't normally send you their timetable beforehand. You follow? And therefore we can't plan. So I can't say if every time everyone gets into his car, that's going to be an act of Pikuach Nefesh. But we're saying that this concept of Shlom HaTzibur, maintaining public order, is enough to allow us to operate things that I might have thought were forbidden on Shabbat, to allow them to work on Shabbat. I'll tell you something that, I don't know if any of you ever go to like some of the Yishuvim around Yerushalayim for Shabbat. But my wife and I, when we first got married, we lived in kibbutz Migdal Oz, which is right next to Efrat. Very, very, very sweet, very quiet, very... Anyway, so as part of... We were like a couple of caravans, and there was like a gate, and we had to take turns. Twice a month, we had to do Shmirah during the night. Once it was from 10 till 2, and the other time it was from 2 till 6 in the morning. Either, 10 at night till 2 in the morning, and then 2 in the morning till 6 in the morning. And there were guards, and we would help them. We had a lot of fun. But every once in a while, it fell on Shabbat. So we would go up with our Shabbat clothes, and we would see everybody in the kibbutz Migdal Oz is religious, and it's Friday night, and it felt so holy, even though everyone's, there's half the guys with walkie-talkies, and the guys with their Shabbat clothes are driving around at 3 o'clock in the morning, doing their patrols around the different Yishuvim all over the place. But it's exactly this over here. I can't say, maybe they're all asleep tonight, but everybody knows if there are no patrols, if everyone knows Friday night is a no patrol night, so chas v'shalom, sooner or later something might happen. And that's why every patrol is Shlom HaTzibur, and every patrol is permitted. Yeah. Is that clear to everybody?
Yeah.
Okay, sweet, wonderful people. I want to summarize very quickly. We started with the question. The question was, what we're going to do, State of Israel, Pikuach Nefesh, and we gave our narrow definition of Pikuach Nefesh, and I would humbly suggest that is a very useful definition for us to work with, because none of us are policemen and none of us have the weight of the State of Israel on our shoulders, and we are, even though we live in the State of Israel, we are still individuals, like they're all still families inside the state. So that definition of the Nodab Yudah is a very useful one for us to bring to our homes. You're only allowed to transgress Shabbat if you're doing something to save a particular person's life. And that definition worked, and that was the basis for the rulings of Rav Herzog. However, after Rav Herzog, Rav Shaul Yisraeli, and then after him Rav Yaakov Ariel, came up with a wider definition based on this position of the Baal Halachot Gedolot, who allowed us to extinguish the metal rod on Shabbat, even though this metal beam, to extinguish it may well be an Isur D'Oraita, but because it's an unseen, it's a public menace, it could cause danger to the public. We see this opening that is no longer dependent on a person, and therefore I can widen it. We saw then Rav Shaul Yisraeli widened the definition further. It's not just saving a life, and it's not just potential danger to the community, but it's also maintaining public order, Shlom HaTzibur. And that moved down afterwards to Rav Yaakov Ariel. It's not just if there's something, God forbid, dangerous, but taking a patrol, which is really just about maintaining public order. There's no particular threat that I know about right now, but we're allowed to maintain police patrols and army patrols and anyone else that needs to do what they need to do on Shabbat. They're all permitted to do that on Shabbat because it is Shlom HaTzibur. Is that clear to everybody?
Yeah.
I might contrast we mentioned also the fire services. Now, fire services might be slightly different. You don't need to do a patrol to make sure no one's going to start a fire. There, I think you would only be, the patrols there are a bit more complicated. And I also imagine to train on Shabbat You might be there's training that has to take place every single day. You would do it on Shabbat as well. But I think fire might be slightly different to police because you don't have this same concept of maintaining Shlom Tibur by having fire engines driving up and down the whole time. But certainly for police and certainly for the army, that is the case. I'll just conclude that I found it very difficult today to read that little piece of Rambam. Because the Rambam that we're reading about, the non-Jews coming in on a Shabbat and they take Jews and how you take them out again, is like a Rambam that people have been studying for 800, 900 years. And then there's certain generations where when they read that Rambam, they just can't help crying because it's something personal. It's not just a theoretical halacha. And unfortunately, we're living in one of those generations. We all daven together that this chapter should end quickly, decisively, and with minimum loss of life, Be'ezrat, with no more loss of life, Be'ezrat Hashem. Yishar koach to everybody.